All right, we're back to our Beowulf and second installment in our look at this great Anglo-Saxon epic. And I left off last time with I'd set the stage for Beowulf and tried to suggest to you how different an Anglo-Saxon or even a Northern European view of heroism was from that of the Greco-Roman world. But thus far on the course, we've just looked at Greco-Roman accounts, and we've neglected the up to this point the English literary tradition. The English literary tradition really begins with Beowulf, and it is introducing us to a different set of gods, for one thing. So the gods of the Norse mythology and the Anglo-Saxon world are named differently than the Greco-Roman ones. And there's a different sort of sense of history in it that's very much more bleak. You'll know it because of the Marvel movies and the Ragnarok, the sort of doom and gloom, the end of all things, the inevitability of a destruction at the forces of evil. That is part of that particular mythology, which we don't get in the Greco-Roman sense, and the sense in the mythology of the, let's say, Northern Europe is more of the context for English literature. Although English literature will, because of the influence of Rome into Britain, bring the whole Greco-Roman tradition into English as well. So English is a very mixed language, mixed in terms of its linguistic sources, but also even its mythology. It's a mashup, to use the phrase often used these days. And it also has a peculiar sense, though, of the individual and the importance of covenant. And I talked about trouth last time, and truth. And that is strong in that tradition and very much influential. If you like The Lord of the Rings, you will see a lot of source material to be found here in Beowulf. And I mentioned last time, finally, that Tolkien himself is largely responsible for Beowulf being considered a canonical work in the English tradition. It was not when he first started working as a scholar in the 1930s. So he wrote a book or an essay called The Monsters and the Critics, which I encourage people to read if they want to study more, but I'm not going to deal with that here. I deal with it on my course on Tolkien. But I left off last time with Beowulf having landed in the land of the Danes and coming to confront this horrible monster by the name of Grendel. And Grendel, as we've learned already, is part of the spawn of Cain. And so is connected to the biblical story, and to some extent by the author, therefore, with an account of the way in which Satan is also involved in confrontation with God. Because remember, Satan, or rather Cain, kills his brother Abel and initiates an account of history whereby the seed of the woman will be at war with the seed of the serpent, or the dragon, if you will. And so it's an epic confrontation between good and evil that the Bible itself, to some degree, authorizes and expands upon. And if you look at the book of Revelation, presents in terms of the wars of two cities, Babylon the Great on the one hand, and the city of the heavenly Jerusalem. That's how the book of Revelation presents it. So it's very much of a eschatological battle. It's a battle that relates to the end times, the last revelation on things. And it's also apocalyptic in the sense that it's revealing something about the nature of the conflicts in the world that runs deeper than just a fight between two strong characters. There's a supernatural element. There's a historical development in it. And I think that's one of the reasons that it's epic, is because it pulls those influences and factors into the equation. So it's not just a story of a a big strong man fighting a big strong villain. It seems like a fight of good against evil. And because Beowulf dies, we have the question then of what is the author saying about the conflict between good and evil in this life, and how do we, if the author is Christian, which at least he seems to be knowledgeable of Scripture, then what do we make of this ourselves in reading it? What's the message here? And it prompts more questions than it does answers, by the way, because it's not the sort of text that is going to give you answers to the questions I just raised. But it does say some things that are interesting and worth study. And one of the questions that I think immediately arises, and we'll try and address that in due course here, is if it is a battle between good and evil, and Beowulf represents the good, the representation of civilization, of light, of he's on God's side, as it were. That's how he's portrayed in this work. Then why are there three monsters? Why not just one? And what do the three monsters connote? What do they symbolize? Like, why three? Why not just one? If it's good versus evil, how come there's not one manifestation of evil? How come three? And as they lay out, as I say, the first two battles against the first two monsters, Grendel and his mother, take place pretty much straight away. And the final confrontation with the dragon, it's 50 years down road, when he's an old king himself, just like he meets here when he first comes to the kingdom. So it's seen with the wisdom of age and years, and the battle is different, and the way he thinks as a hero is also different. And so I think that's all very interesting and worthy of note. And so I just want to say there's a sophistication about this portrait that is also going to give it, with good reason, the status of an epic. Because I can even give biblical examples here on this front. When it comes to wisdom, you'll know, if you're biblical scholars, I assume some of you are studying scriptures and will be doing biblical studies and so forth, you'll see that in terms of what is called wisdom literature, there are different genres of wisdom literature, or different types of wisdom literature. Some are pretty obvious, like Proverbs is a form of wisdom literature, right? And so is Ecclesiastes. And so is the book of Job. Now, if you compare and contrast those three forms of wisdom literature, you'll find that they are very, very different in the way they articulate themselves and what they seem to speak of. Job seems to deal with the wisdom of suffering. Ecclesiastes seems to deal with the apparent vanity of life. And Proverbs deals with, if you look at books 1 to 9, with the contrast or the allure of folly to the young. And yet the recommendation to follow the counsel of the wise and to do as Solomon recommends to the young man. But it's different. And that's because wisdom has a great complexity to it, in the same way that the confrontation with evil does, is what I'm suggesting here. It's an analogy. And so the three monsters are there because evil manifests itself to us in very different ways, and often at different times in our life. And the answer that is given and the perspective that we have on it also changes as our life changes. And that doesn't mean the wisdom changes or that evil changes or what's good changes, but the way we see it does. So it's situationally different, if that makes any sense. And so I want to give a little bit of an analogy. This was from a French Lutheran theologian by the name of Oscar Cullmann, Cullmann. And he gave the famous analogy of Christian eschatology, which describes Christology in terms of events. And so he said, that Jesus is in some ways to be analogous with D-Day. Do you know what D-Day is? Like, I've got the Remembrance Day poppy on my chest here today. D-Day is the day of Deliverance Day when the Allied troops landed in Normandy. If you've ever seen them, there's a lot of movies about that now that have shown and cataloged it, where you see the troops coming in on the boats, and they're coming in what we know now, which they didn't know then, or maybe they did know then and they did it anyway, is that the Germans were waiting for them. And then the machine gun turrets on the beaches, and as soon as they landed, they were just basically gunning them down and blowing them apart. And so the loss of life was extraordinary. It was such a bloody battle. Second World War. And yet they managed to hold the beachhead and create a landing strip, which then became the decisive moment in World War II, when the Allies were assured that they would then go on to take Germany, because they took them at their strongest. They got mowed down, and yet they held a beachhead that allowed more troops to come in and then to go, beyond that front line towards Germany. And so D-Day is the beginning of the end. And in that sense, there's a relationship between the end of the war when Christ is born. It's the beginning of the end. Like at the fact when Christ is born, we know that the seed of the woman promised in Genesis 3:15 has come. So it's all over in that sense. And Satan knows it, and that's why Augustus orders him, or rather the governor wants all the children under 2 to be killed, because he realizes the import of this, or rather Satan does. Whether the local Roman governor does is a different matter. But there's an awareness of the significance of the point. But this is D-Day, when Christ is born. But the crucifixion has not yet happened. That is yet to happen. And the second coming is long into the future. But Christians, in terms of their struggle with evil, are all going to connect their life significance in accordance with what happens at Calvary, at the cross. And we look upon that as what God did in the past, as the triumph over evil and sin and death. That's what happens at the cross. There's a victory, and it's a total victory. And it's the proof that it's done is by the fact that Christ is raised from the dead. That's the proof that the battle's already over. Because you can't undo what Christ did. You can't add to it, because it's a total defeat. Sin is destroyed. The consequences of it. Death has been overturned. Total victory. But we still live on, and we live in the light of that, but at the same time we still experience sin and suffering and evil in this world. And so there's an ongoing struggle against sin and evil and death. And there's a futuristic element that will only be dealt with when Christ returns in the second coming. And at that point, we're told in Revelation that death will be no more. And that the consequence of sin will be removed. And there will be a new heaven and a new earth and so forth. So there's that historical dimension to it, which I think Beowulf is to some degree touching on in a small way. So I wanted to begin with those 3 things. So 3 conflicts, 3 monsters. And I wanted to emphasize that there seems to be a progression, or an escalation even, of the terms of engagement. Each monster that Beowulf confronts seems to be worse than the foregoing one. The first one he can fight hand to hand. The second one he can't. And the third one, he's 50 years on, he's not going to defeat with physical strength at all. It's the most serious of all of them. It's a dragon. It's in that sense a representation of a sort of evil which no one can defeat. It's a restless malice. And the gold of a dragon is always cursed. You can't take the treasure from the dragon without bringing a curse upon yourself. And as we find out, that's exactly what happens, is some poor thief, impoverished, goes and blunders upon the treasure trove of the dragon and awakens the dragon, and thereby brings it out of its sleep and threatens to destroy everything that by this point King Beowulf has vowed to defend. So it just keeps getting worse. He keeps beating the evil down, and it keeps coming back seemingly more implacable and more difficult. So each monster poses its own particular threat. Let me just look at the three if I can. This is, I pick up where I left off last time. These are Beowulf's words. He boasts, and it seems like a boast. He's a young man, aware of his own strength, legendary. We already know the stories told about this. Others are telling it as well. He says, when it comes to fighting, I count myself as dangerous any day as Grendel. So it won't be a cutting edge I'll wield to mow him down easily as I might. He has no idea of the arts of war, so it's not a fair fight. Of shield or sword play, although he does possess a wild strength. No weapons, therefore. So Beowulf decides not to use the advantage of his weaponry against Grendel. It's going to be a fair fight. He's going to appeal to justice to defeat Grendel. Isn't that interesting? If you didn't read this very carefully, you would think he's trusting in his own strength. And he does say that he is as dangerous in terms of fighting, but it's not about the victory, it's about the means of victory. And what he trusts in. And what he trusts in is that justice will prevail. And the way that he ensures that is by not using weapons if Grendel doesn't have any. No weapons, therefore. So we see something about the virtue of the character being brought out in this. Right? Isn't it? It's very subtle there, but it gives us something of this is not boasting of a young man. I'm the strongest, beat my chest stuff. It's an allegiance to something greater than the victory itself. It's a principle. No weapons, therefore, for either this night. Unarmed he shall face me, if face me he dares. And may the divine Lord in his wisdom grant the glory of victory to whichever side he sees fit. He doesn't know he's going to win. He's trusting in God. There's a faithfulness in Beowulf in the fight. Yes. Yes. Sure. And it is that sort of scenario to some degree, although he has a superhuman strength himself, bear-like, whatever, but he is not going to use the thing that is to his advantage, superior weapons. In that sense, he's different. David won't take on the armor of Saul because it doesn't fit him. Whereas Beowulf has the armor, he can use it, and he won't. And he won't because he trusts in justice. And so he will fight fair and let it go at that. Now, what he doesn't know is that the weapons wouldn't work anyway. But he doesn't know that, and that matters. And the fact that he's and actually that's how he prevails over the evil, interestingly, is that he trusts to divine justice. So first thing, take home lesson about the confrontation with evil is that to defeat evil, it's not about winning. It's about doing the right thing. Because it's not might is right, it's rather right is might. I just made that up. It's a good sound to it. But what's right will make me mighty. Now, this is very medieval. In the clashes of knights in jousting, they believe the most virtuous knight will prevail in battle. The most just, the most pure in heart will win. This is the Christianization of the military code of the Roman world. It's the most pure in heart that will prevail in battle. Very different than the Greco-Roman world. Remember, we saw in the Aeneid, Aeneas runs through Turnus who's on his knees begging for mercy at the end of it. And he got it done. Who cares? They do in the Middle Ages. They care. It's how you won the victory. Did you do it in your own strength, or was it the Lord's doing? Since the Lord is the sovereign over all things, we'll trust in the right way. And if I lose, I lose. That's okay. Then God's will be done. So very interesting right away, and it shows the Christian allegiance, I think, of the narrator himself, whoever it is. So with that speech, then down the brave man lay with his bolster under his head and his whole company of sea rovers at rest beside him. None of them expected he would ever see his homeland again or get back to his native place and the people who reared him. So they are actually, now this is what is so moving about it, they all expect him to lose, including him. Right? They knew too well the way it was before, how often the Danes had fallen prey to death in the mead hall. But the Lord was weaving a victory on his war loom for the weather yachts. That's the narrative voice interjecting. The men who have given themselves over to this path, there's a providence outside of this that is working in this situation. So that's actually behind the choices being made and is working throughout the story. So we see the divine intervention here. Through the weather yachts, by the way, the Beowulf author does not believe that there are weather yachts, weather giants, weather gods. It's the Lord. But he's speaking into the Anglo-Saxon culture here and using their terminology, but really what it is the Lord's work through this. And through the strength of one, they all prevailed. They would crush their enemy and come through in triumph and gladness. Who's the one? Could be Beowulf. Could be. Could be. I don't see it in the commentaries because they assume that it's Beowulf, because of course it will be Beowulf, but I think there's good reason to think that he is making an oblique reference to Christ here, because through the seed of the woman, the serpent will be crushed. So Beowulf in that sense is a Christ figure whose victory will only be won through Christ's already accomplished victory. As I say, it's pretty oblique. It's not explicit, so it's really hard to persuade people who are not already on board with that type of reading, but I think it's warranted here, at any rate. Through the strength of one, they all prevailed. They would crush their enemy and come through in triumph and gladness. The truth is clear. Almighty God rules over mankind and always has. Statement from the narrator. This is not true of this one tale. It's the true of all tales. So very interesting, and not what you would expect from a pagan author, certainly, or an Anglo-Saxon author. From the northern tradition where they have this idea of evil triumphing over good, ultimately in a sort of a Ragnarok episode. That's not what we get here. There's far more hope in that statement than anything we'll see in that tradition. Anyway, so now the narrative commences. Then out of the night came the shadow stalker, stealthy and swift. The hall guards were slack, asleep at their posts, all except one. It was widely understood that as long as God disallowed it, the fiend could not bear them to his shadow born. One man, however, was in fighting mood, awake and on edge, spoiling for action. That one man, of course, is Beowulf. In off the moors, down through the mist bands, God-cursed Grendel came greedily loping. The bane of the race of men roamed forth, hunting for a prey in the high hall. Under the cloud murk he moved towards it until it shone above him, a sheer keep of fortified gold. Nor was that the first time he had scouted the grounds of Hrothgar's dwelling, although never in his life, before or since, did he find harder fortune or hall defenders. Spurned and joyless, he journeyed on ahead and arrived at the bawn. He finds an iron braced door, which turned on its edge when his hands touch it. Why? Because he just rips the iron door off. That's the strength in his hands. Then his rage boiled over. He ripped open the mouth of the building, maddening for blood, pacing the length of the patterned floor with his loathsome tread under, while a baleful light, flame more than light, flared from his eyes. Isn't that interesting? A flame, and insidious. More than a light, there's a flame, like like a Balrog, in the blaze of his gaze here. He saw many men in the mansion sleeping, a ranked company of kinsmen and warriors quartered together in his, and his glee was demonic. Picturing the mayhem before morning, he would rip life from limb and devour them, feed on their flesh. But his fate that night was due to change. His days of ravening had come to an end. Now, what's really interesting about this is the narrator is already giving away what's going to happen. He's going to lose. But the anticipation of it is just built by the suspense. It's actually built by it. You don't, if you give away what's going to happen, it doesn't necessarily deprive it of interest. It deprives it, it makes it exciting. There's going to be an epic clash here, and Beowulf is going to win. Remember, we saw he already used this when he was talking about the building of Heorot, which was destined for burning. As soon as he built it, it was built for burning. And then it did burn. And now we find that Grendel is about to lose, and yet we still read on. And as he reads on, the horror ensues. Mighty and canny Hugelax's kinsman was keenly watching for the first move the monster would make. Nor did the creature keep him waiting, but struck in suddenly and started in. He grabbed and mauled a man on his bench, bit into his bone lappings, bolted down his blood, and gorged on him in lumps, leaving the body utterly lifeless, eaten up, hand and foot. Venturing closer, his talon was raised to attack Beowulf where he lay on his bed. He was bearing in with open claw when the alert heroes' comeback and arm lock forestalled him utterly. Takes the hand and rips it behind his back in an arm lock. The captain of evil discovered himself in a hand grip harder than anything he had ever encountered in any man on the face of the earth. Every bone in his body quailed and recoiled. He could not escape. He was desperate to flee to his den and hide with the devil's litter, for in all his days he had never been clamped or cornered like this. Then Hugelax's trusty retainer recalled his bedtime speech, sprang to his feet, and got a firm hold. Fingers were bursting, the monster backtracking, the man overpowering. The dread of the land was desperate to escape, to take a roundabout road and flee to his lair in the fens. The latching power in his fingers weakened. It was the worst trip the terror-monger had taken to Heorot. There's an understated humor to it. This is the worst trip. I just want to go home. Like, I want to go back with the other demons and run away and hide. This is a bad day, no more. Because he's caught in the grip. As I said, I think there's humor in it, in the recounting of it, but maybe that's me and my perverse sense of humor. And now the timbers trembled and sang, a hall session that harrowed every Dane inside the stockade, because they're crashing around throughout Heorot, going from side to side, bashing into the side of the walls. And stumbling in fury, the two contenders crashed through the building. The hall clattered and hammered, but somehow survived the onslaught and kept standing. It was handsomely structured, a sturdy frame braced with the best of blacksmith's work inside and out. The story goes that as the pair struggled, mead benches were smashed and sprung off the floor, gold fittings and all, because the mead benches are stuck into the floor by gold, and they're getting ripped out off the ground. But before then, no shielding elder would believe there was any power or person upon earth capable of wrecking their horn-rigged hull, unless the burning embrace of a fire engulfed it in flame. Then an extraordinary wail arose, and bewildering fear came over the Danes. Everyone felt it, who heard that cry as it echoed off the wall. A God-cursed scream and strain of catastrophe, the howl of the loser, the lament of the hell serf keening his wound. He was overwhelmed, manacled tight by the man who of all men was foremost and strongest in the days of his life. But the Earl Troop's leader was not inclined to allow his caller to depart alive. He did not consider that life, that is his own life, of much account to anyone anywhere. Time and again, Beowulf's warriors worked to defend their lord's life, laying about them at best they could their ancestral blades. Stalwart in action, they kept striking out on every side, seeking to cut straight to the soul. When they joined the struggle, there was something they could not have known at the time, that no blade on earth, no blacksmith's art could ever damage their demon opponent. Evil will not be defeated through human technology. This sort of evil, the forged blacksmith's art that makes weapons, no weapon fashioned by man can defeat this form of evil, because it's not earthly evil. Again, this is the commentator of the author who's clearly read Genesis and understands the nature of the evil, probably understands Ephesians 6 as well, that our enemy is not flesh and blood, right? Put on the armor of God. Our enemy is not flesh and blood, but principalities and powers, etc. That's what he seems to be illustrating here. And so this is not just paganism and understanding of things on a very carnal level. It's a supernatural encounter here that the author seems to be engaging in, commenting on. And he had conjured the harm from the cutting edge of every weapon. But his going away out of this world in the days of his life would be agony to him, and his alien spirit would travel into the fiend's keeping. When he, who had harrowed the hearts of men with pain and affliction in former times, and had given offense also to God, found that his bodily powers failed him, Hugelax's kinsman kept him helplessly locked in a hand grip. As long as either lived, he was hateful to the other. The monster's whole body was in pain. A tremendous wound appeared on his shoulder. So he's got the arm behind his back, and he pulls, and he pulls, and he pulls, and pop! The shoulder ripped off his body. And in the Anglo-Saxon, you can actually hear that, and it gets ripped right off his body. And he dies by having his arm ripped right off of him, pulled up the back. Sinews split and the bone lappings burst. Beowulf was granted the glory of winning. Grendel was driven under the fen banks, fatally hurt to his desolate lair. His days were numbered. The end of his life was coming over him. He knew it for certain, and one bloody clash had fulfilled the dearest wishes of the Danes. The man who had lately landed among them, proud and sure, had purged the hall, kept it from harm. He was happy with his night work and the courage he had shown. The yacht captain had boldly fulfilled his boast to the Danes. He had healed and relieved a huge distress. Okay, so we've just talked about the hurt done to Grendel, and now here's the healing done to Hurot, and it's immediately presented in terms of that. There's a sort of healing that comes from a victory over evil. It's like a cancer has been removed. He had healed and relieved a huge distress, unremitting humiliations, the hard fate they'd been forced to undergo. No small affliction. Clear proof of this could be seen in the hand the hero displayed high up near the roof. The whole of Grendel's shoulder and arm is awesome grasp. So what does he take with the arm? Oh, it's a trophy. On the wall at the side of the mead hall. Hooray! We can see the big claw, and now we can raise a glass toast. There's Grendel's arm. Hey! Pretty gruesome, but that we're talking about warriors and men, they're very happy. This is a symbol of the defeat of their enemy. So what we see in Grendel is a very visceral and primal threat, just pure malevolence and hatred, and representing an evil that seems to go back far deeper than human malice. This is not just a hatred of Grendel towards the men who are there. He seems to hate God. Right? There's a deeper malice that's there. It's a physical threat, but behind that physical threat seems something far greater and worse, and therefore impossible to slay without God's agreement that it happened, which the account gives to us. So that's the first thing. It's the unknown, it's the outsider, it's everything that we try and banish into the outskirts of civilization. It's sort of like back in the Odyssey we talked about the Cyclops, those giants that live and feast on flesh, and they're outside of civilization, those uncivilized forces that we try and keep out, we try and build protections with, but they're there, they're always trying to get in, they're always trying to destroy civilization. It's always there. It seems to represent that. It's not just terrorists. There's a darker evil that lies behind that. Sort of a restless malice. So that's the first battle against the first weapon. There is, in the morning, when the morning comes, now we can see what's happened. Because remember, this is all happening in the dark. They're crashing around. Beowulf's got him, and we are told of what's happening, but actually if you were present, all you would hear is the crashing. And the only reason Beowulf can hold on to him is because he's holding onto his arm, otherwise he'd lose sight of him in the darkness. But now you can see what happened, and you can see the trail of his departure, the blood trail. With his death upon him, he had dived deep into his marsh den, drowned out his life, and his heathen soul. Hell claimed him there. Claim of the Beowulf author. His bodily life is over, and his spiritual life will now exist in some sort of conscious torment. That's the first installment. Then away they rode, the old retainers, with many a young man following after, a troop on horseback, in high spirits on their bay steeds. Beowulf's doings were praised over and over again. Nowhere, they said, north or south, between the two seas, or under the tall sky on the broad earth, was there anyone better to raise a shield or to rule a kingdom. Oh, or to rule a kingdom. Already, Hugelac, he couldn't defeat evil, but Beowulf can. There's an element of overpraising the deed and wanting to make an idol out of Beowulf right away. The lawful king is being speaken of rather ill here. But there was no laying of blame on their lord, the noble Hrothgar. He was a good king. So note that the subtlety of this, but the immediate, and this is very realistic, when you win such a significant victory, there's a tendency for people to want to look to this person as their leader. But there's no revolt here, because there's a recognition that Hrothgar is a good king. That has been said repeatedly here, by the way. Very interesting. Hrothgar was said previously to be a good king, and it's reiterated. And I said to you, I want you to keep that in mind, because Beowulf is going to become a good king at the end, and he's going to be compared by this to Hrothgar. How did Hrothgar act? How does Beowulf act? Beowulf, the young man, will be seen in one light. As a king, we'll see. So, at times the warband broke into a gallop, letting their chestnut horses race wherever the going was good. And then we get a song. A thane of the king's household, a carrier of tales, a traditional singer, deeply schooled in the lore of the past, linked a new theme to a strict meter. And now he starts to sing a new song. What's the new song? It's the song of Beowulf. He's adding that to the tales sung in the hall of old. We've added a new legend. This man is a living legend. Just like we see in the Odyssey. right? Where they're already singing about Odysseus and the men who won victory at Troy. They're singing about them while they're still alive. We do not live in such times where there are such men that were singing stories of legend while they're still alive. Maybe we will. But others have in periods of human history. But that's the case here. The man started to recite with skill, rehearsing Beowulf's triumphs and feats in well-fashioned lines, entwining his words. So he's already showing something about the importance of poetry, is that it memorializes and it makes memorable the deeds that were done so that we don't forget, lest we forget. I'm wearing the poppy, Remembrance Day, right? So there's a lest we forget element, and it's the framing of it, the singing of it, the remembering of it. That's part of the significance of the event. It makes a past event of present significance. Gone into the future, it says something about the civilization. Then we value these things. We're going to remember that man. We're not going to forget what they did. Right? And then he told what he'd heard repeated in songs about Siegmund's exploits. The dragon slayer, it says in the gloss here. He hasn't defeated a dragon, but he immediately cites Siegmund, who defeated a dragon. And of course, anyone who is aware of Siegmund and the slaying of the dragon is going to immediately associate not only Beowulf with the dragon slaying, but also think about what's going to happen in the future when he does confront a dragon. So it's again, that's foreshadowing, dramatic foreshadowing. So repeated in songs about Siegmund's exploits, all of those many feats and marvels, the struggles and wanderings of Whale's son, things unknown to anyone except to Fitela, feuds and foul doings confided by uncle to nephew when he felt the urge to speak of them. Always they had been partners in the fight, friends in need. They killed giants. Their conquering swords had brought them down. And then we get the song itself, and that will be italicized. Here I'm going to skip over the song as much as I dislike doing that. I have to get through the 3 battles. But the song is an important part of the story. Note in Tolkien's Lord of the Rings, there are repeated songs, which they cut out in the films. But just like we see in the Odyssey, the Iliad, any pagan epic of worth its salt, we'll see that the singing and the memorializing of the deeds that are done is an important part of every culture. And one of the reasons we live in a barbaric age is we don't sing common songs about the victories of the past. Like Remembrance Day is one of the few remembrances of a past moment of the conflict between good and evil. There are a lot more we probably could and should be singing. We sing them on Sundays, actually. That's what hymns do. That's why it's important to sing. Remember, put into memory these things. It's so important. Don't say you know about it already. You got to sing about it. It cheers your soul, gives you joy, reminds you of the victories won. It's important that you feel what you also profess. Anyway, I'll skip over the story of Siegmund, which he recounts here. And when Hrothgar comes to the hall, he gives thanks for Beowulf, and he adopts Beowulf in his heart at any rate. And then he will go on to do that a little bit more. Beowulf now giving his account of the battle. This is typical. Tell us what happened, Beowulf. If I remember it happened in the dark, you give us your story. Storytelling, again, we saw in the Odyssey, is a part of heroic myths and legends. Men in battle will do this. Sports athletes will do this also. We watched you do this. Now tell us, 20 years on, we watched this, we celebrated. What was it like what did you say at that point to so-and-so? We're in the huddle or whatever. What did it say on the bench? And they give you some humorous anecdote. It's part of the whole narrative. It's part of the whole event. It carries on in story and myth into legend. So Beowulf gives his account of the fight, and we get the trophy, which is a symbol and a sign, just like the poppy is of that, and it reminds us of bigger things. Remember Unferth? I said he flighted him before, disparaged him. Let's go to him. because Beowulf author has not forgotten him. There was less tampering and big talk then from Unferth the boaster, lest of his blather, as the hall thanes eyed the awful proof of the hero's prowess, the splayed hand up under the eaves, every nail, claw, scale, and spur, every spike and welt on the hand of that heathen brute was like barbed steel. Everybody said there was no honed iron hard enough to pierce him through, no time-proof blade that could cut his brutal blood-caked claw. And then the order was given for all hands to help refurbish Heorot immediately. So the damage is done, and we get immediate restoration of everything that's been lost. So first pass at evil, pretty easy. God ordained, Beowulf comes in, cleans up. The hall has been damaged, but they fix it pretty quickly. Very easy, if that were all that there was to it. And again, D-Day, a bit like that maybe. But remember, D-Day happens in when? 1944? And we got another year of intense battle before the day of victory is. And a year of hundreds of thousands, millions of men fighting in close combat, shooting whatever bombs, distance, terrible losses. So, the gold is there. There's a victory feast. Yeah, Beowulf is given gifts for it from the king, and the other yachts are also rewarded. And the minstrel performs yet again, and we'll skip over this one as well, but this time you will see that this is about a princess married to the Frisian king Finn, who loses her son and her brother Hneef to a fight at Finn's hall. Why is that presented here? It's a little ominous. It reminds us of a different story, and that the victories of the past were not uniform. There's other fights, there are other victories. It reminds us of relationships now. And that's important because we're about to have the second form of evil represented in the form of Grendel's mother. We didn't know anything about Grendel's mother before this. Well, now we are about to be acquainted with Grendel's mother. And we'll skip over this. Spend a year in exile. The spring comes, and the Danish warriors spur themselves to renew the feud. Finn is killed, his stronghold looted, his widow Hildebert carried back to Denmark. So it's not all over. The stories will tell you that evil persists. So evil has been triumphed over fully, completely. It's D-Day, and yet evil persists. It carries on. So evil is not something that just goes. This is why I don't like the film version of The Lord of the Rings. It gives you a sense that Sauron has been defeated, the ring's been destroyed, so evil's gone. But if you read the book, you'll find that evil persists in Middle-earth. It has not been destroyed. A manifestation of it has, but it's not gone. Evil persists. And that it's more realistic to say that evil it needs to be confronted, it needs to be defeated, but even when you do, it will come back. So it's not just the events of the past, it's the present resistance which is needed, ongoing. The poem was over, the poet had performed, a pleasant murmur stirred on the benches. Stewards did the rounds with wine in splendid jugs, and Wealhtheow came to sit in her gold crown between two good men, uncle and nephew. Each one of them still trusted the other. And the forthright Unferth, admired by all for his mind and courage, although under a cloud for killing his brothers, just like Cain did with his brothers, reclined near the king. The queen spoke. Enjoy this drink, my generous lord. Raise up your goblet. Entertain the yachts and entertain them, etc. And gifts are given. And they include a torque. A torque is like I don't want to say a necklace, but it goes around your neck. It's a silver. It is what it is. It's not a necklace. It's a big silver round thing. Goes around it, probably protects your neck a little bit. And with wrought gold. And Beowulf is going to give it to Hugelac, and Hugelac is going to die with it on. But there's an exchange of gifts. Bedtime in Huron. And we find, oh no, there's another threat. And it's immediate. Kindred. When Odysseus kills the suitors, we find that there's a bigger threat right behind them. All the suitors' relatives want his blood for killing their kindred. As you can imagine, it seems unjust. He's killed them all. The gods have told him to do it. He can't spare any of them. In accordance with Athena says, I want them all dead. Kill them all. They do. But then, of course, this is unjust to kill all of them, and their families have been deprived of their sons. And so there's a reckoning. Same thing going on here. So the immediate consequence of killing Grendel is that Grendel's mother comes in, and she is driven by revenge. And a desire for justice. This is a complicated thing. We have some sympathy for Grendel's mother. In that sense, in the sense that we would recognize the grief of any mother. And so the reason why this is a really difficult one is because Grendel's easier to hate. Grendel's mother's a little harder on a human scale. Even though her son was evil and he needed to be dealt with as he did. Should we give any ground to his mother? We want to. There's a little less. So there's an element of a complicated desire for revenge that seems justified here, and yet Grendel's mother is, of course, also a descendant of Cain, right? Is equally evil, but we acknowledge the legitimacy of her grief in the battle here, and her maternal love of her son. At least we acknowledge something good in this, and yet this seems to be a progression on the threat here. We're not acknowledging the right ordering of loves here in her love. She loves her son, but she doesn't love God. So the love that she has is illegitimate. Still a grave threat. And so the second battle begins. Grendel's mother, monstrous Hellbride, brooded on her wrongs. Note that she broods on the injustice. Beowulf fought Grendel because of it, on the basis of justice. I will fight it fairly. Right? Fair fight. I'm not going to use a weapon. Of course, he couldn't have used a weapon. It wouldn't have worked. He didn't know that. So he's a just character. But she perceives injustice in this, so now she has a just cause from her perspective. And we have some sympathy for that. This is a grave threat. The social injustice done to Grendel's mother. Brooded on her wrongs. She had been forced down into fearful waters, the cold depths, after Cain had killed his father's son, felled his own brother with a sword. So we have sympathy for this woman. Branded an outlaw, marked by having murdered, he moved into the wilds, shunned company and joy, and from Cain there sprang misbegotten spirits, among them Grendel, the banished and accursed, due to come to grips without watcher and Heorot waiting to do battle. The monster wrenched and wrestled with him, but Beowulf was mindful of his mighty strength, the wondrous gifts God had showered on him. He relied for help on the Lord of all, on his care and favor. So he overcame the foe, brought down the hell brute, broken and bowed, outcast from all sweetness, the enemy of mankind, made for his death den. But now his mother had sallied forth on a savage journey, grief-racked and ravenous, desperate for revenge. So the motive of revenge is the second form of evil and a threat, because it's an appeal to justice as well. And the reason why it's so difficult to defeat is that it seems to, unlike Grendel, we seem to think that there's merit in the cause. because there is a sort of merit in it. But note that she despises the Lord, and she despises and has no use for anyone who bears the image of God, aside from her son. So it's just maternal love. I love my own kindred, but I don't love the whole of God's creation. This is a huge threat. Tribalism. She represents tribalism. The bonds of family against that of all people. Always a threat to everybody. So it's a thing that in our day is growing, that sense of tribalism, identity, and so forth. These are my people, those are your people. I love my people, I hate your people. I don't recognize the commonality of everyone bearing the image of God. And if you accept that tribalism, you've already given way to evil. Right? Because you're denying the essential goodness of the person that you're opposing in favor of my own flesh and blood, flesh and kin. So kindred fighting. Anyway, she came to Heorot. There inside the hall, Danes lay asleep, earls who would soon endure a great reversal once Grendel's mother attacked and entered. Her onslaught was less only by as much as an Amazon warrior's strength is less than an armed man's. Where would he read about the Amazons? He must know the Greeks. He's read Greek literature. The Amazons are a tribe. Mentioned by Herodotus. We know about them from Wonder Woman and so forth. It's from Herodotus, never mind Wonder Woman. Female warriors. Only as much as an Amazon warrior's strength is less than an armed man's, which isn't much. When the hefted sword, its hammered edge and gleaming blade slathered in blood, raises a sturdy boar ridge off a helmet. Then in the hall, hard-honed swords were grabbed from the bench, many a broad shield lifted and braced. There was little thought of helmets or woven mail when they woke in terror. The hell dam, that is Grendel's mother, was in panic, desperate to get out, in mortal terror the moment she was found. She had pounced and taken one of the retainers in a tight hold, then headed for the fen. She takes them, and unlike Beowulf, or Grendel rather, who gluts himself on it right away, she's dragging the corpse down into the den, into the fen, down into the underworld, and is going to feast on him there. She's a little more careful. And who was this that she grabbed? One of Hrothgar's retainers, the most beloved of the friends he trusted between the two seas. She didn't indiscriminately attack everyone. She went after the one that was closest to Hrothgar's heart. Vengeance. You took my most beloved, I'm going to take yours. Right? It's targeted. It doesn't go after everyone, not grabbing 40 of them and dragging and killing them like a fox does in a henhouse and kills everything. She goes after the one that's closest to the king's heart. She could have killed the king. She doesn't want to kill the king. She wants the king to feel like she feels. Take his most beloved. That's what she does. Pick him out. She had done away with a great warrior, ambushed him at rest. Beowulf was elsewhere. Earlier, after the award of the treasure, the Yat had been given another lodging. There was uproar in Heorot. She had snatched their trophy. Grendel's bloodied hand, it was a fresh blow to the afflicted bond. The bargain was hard, both parties having to pay with the lives of friends. Now, this is justice, by the way. This is an eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth. Right? You took my son, I'll take your most beloved. Still presented as evil, because the two sides are not equal. The bargain was hard. And the old lord, the gray-haired warrior, was heartsore. Isn't that a great word? And weary when he heard the news. His highest-placed advisor, his dearest companion, was dead and gone. Beowulf was quickly brought to the chamber. The winner of fights, the arch warrior, came first footing in with his fellow troops to where the king and his wisdom waited, still wondering whether Almighty God would ever turn the tide of his misfortunes. Hrothgar knows that Grendel's been defeated, but now his retainer's been lost, so he is as down as he ever was. Will God ever show me mercy? So Beowulf entered with his band in attendance, and the wooden floorboards banged and rang as he advanced, hurrying to address the prince of the Ingwins, asking if he'd rested since the urgent summons had come as a surprise. Then Hrothgar, the shielding's helmet, spoke. Rest. What is rest? Sorrow has returned. Alas for the Danes, Eschere is dead. He was Hremenlaf's elder brother and a soulmate to me, a true mentor. My right-hand man when the ranks clashed and our boar crests had to take a battering in the line of action. Eschere was everything the world admires in a wise man and a friend. When this roaming killer came in a fury and slaughtered him in Huron, where she is hiding, glutting on the corpse and glorying in her escape, I cannot tell. She's taken up the feud because of last night when you killed Grendel, wrestled and racked him in ruinous combat, since for too long he had terrorized us with his depredations. He died in battle, paid with his life. And now this powerful other one arrives, this force for evil, driven to avenge her kinsman's death. It would be part of the Anglo-Saxon warrior code, by the way, the expectation that either she'd be giving gold, weirgeld, money for the man, or there be compensation in terms of a death. Or so it seems to the Thanes in their grief. In the anguish every Thane endures at the loss of a ring giver, now that the hand that bestowed so richly has been stilled in death. And so then they talk about grief and relational grief, relational loss. And this is a second manifestation of evil, the loss of a beloved one. It's enough to lose your own life. Now you're losing those around you, the nearest and dearest. You feel that more keenly than the loss of your own life in some ways. It's a further manifestation of evil. If you lose a son, if you lose the person that you most value in your life, just like that, and targeted, a terrible evil. Fathers, mothers. And she goes down, and where does she reside? She resides in a haunted mere. Now, a mere is like a sea, a lake. She lives at the bottom of this. So and this is the difference between the Grendel and his mother. Beowulf's going to have to, Grendel comes to him. And so we totally are supportive of the fight against Grendel, because Grendel's actually bringing the battle to him and bringing destruction to Huron. This is a little bit further. He's going to have to go where evil lives. And he's going to go down into the underworld, just like the heroes of old. He's going to go down into the depths of the water, a hellish place where Grendel's mother resides. Down he goes, and the Beowulf author understatedly says that that is no good place. Understatement. It's a horrible place of darkness, that where she resides. And Beowulf is not beaten, and he's not discouraged by what has happened. Beowulf's a man of faith, if you will. And he speaks to Hrothgar. Beowulf, son of Ecgtheow, spoke. Wise, sir, do not grieve. It is always better to avenge dear ones than to indulge in mourning. For every one of us living in this world means waiting for our end. So this is the voice of wisdom here. He's a young man, but still, we're all going to die. It comes to all. The wise and the unwise. This is the Ecclesiastes. There's nothing new under the sun. Death comes to the righteous and the unrighteous. There's vanity in this. There's an apparent meaninglessness to it. This is another form of wisdom, another form of evil that's being visited by this. Let whoever can win glory before death. When a warrior is gone, That will be his best and only bulwark, that he has glory. Live for glory while you can. Be honorable in this life. So arise, my lord, and let us immediately set forth on the trail of this troll dam. I guarantee you she will not get away, not to dens underground, nor upland groves, nor the ocean floor. She'll have nowhere to flee to. Endure your troubles today, bear up, and be the man I expect you to be. With that, the old lord sprang to his feet. He speaks like a counselor. He just lost his counsel, Escher. And now he speaks to him, even though he's an old man. He's an old man who's beaten down by his heart-sick cares at the loss of his advisor. And now his advisor, Beowulf, encourages him. And it does that. He springs to his feet and praised God for Beowulf's pledge. Then a bit and halter were brought for his horse with the plated mane. The wise king mounted with royal saddle, and out in style he rode with a force of shield bearers. The forest paths were marked all over with the monster's track or trail on the ground wherever she'd gone, across the dark moors, dragging away the body of that thane, Hrothgar's best counselor and overseer of the country. On they go, and as they go, they get armed. Now, the first battle, he had no arms. Remember, he took them all off. I'm going to go hand to hand for the sake of justice. He has no sense that he needs to do this here because his opponent has weapons, as far as he knows. So he arms himself. There's an arming ceremony. This is typical of heroic literature. And we'll hear not only about the fact that he is arming, but that he has special armaments. The sword will have a name. Hero has a name, so is a sword. So will his horse, so will all things. This is a heroic part of heroic literature. Yes? They all have names. Because there's a supernatural element to the battle, and the name of it is the significance of it. And there'll be a story for the sword or the shield or for the helmet or whatever. It's part of the legendary character of the whole story, and you'll get something significant about it. So in the case of Tolkien, it's obvious. Like, this is the blade that was broken. Right? And it had a name, but when it's reforged, it has a new name. And what the name is Anduril, Flame of the West. And he holds it up, right? And it's the same sword, but it's a new sword. It's reforged, but it's the same thing that defeated you before that will defeat you again. There's a representation of virtue in the sword. So the man is represented by the armament in some ways. So it's an extension of his virtue and character, and so there's a special forging. The materials, yes, but all of that. So he gets ready here. He puts on this. And note this, and this is really interesting. He gets a gift from Unferth. Decisive. The gift from Unferth at that moment of need was of no small importance. A Brehon, as a gift, given him a hilted weapon, a rare and ancient sword named Hrunting. The iron blade with its ill-boding patterns had been tempered in blood. It had never failed the hand of anyone who hefted it in battle, anyone who had fought and faced the worst in the gap of danger. This was not the first time it had been called to perform heroic deeds. Then he lent that blade to the better swordsman Unferth. The strong-built son of Ecglaf could hardly have remembered the ranting speech he had made in his cups, because now he recognizes in Beowulf the better man. Take my sword. You deserve the sword. So there's again a moment of the heroism of Beowulf grows, the stakes of the battle rise. He now represents not himself, but the whole of the company that are now united by the hero who is unbeaten by the defeats that are blighting their nation. And he admits that he was not man enough to face the turmoil of a fight underwater and the risk to his life. So there he lost fame and repute. It was different for the other rigged out in his gear, ready to do battle. I'm going to run out of time very quickly here. That's not good. I think I'm going to have to end up doing the dragon next time. I will do that, but let me deal with this then. He goes down with the armament, and he goes down and he swims down to the bottom of the mere, to where Grendel's mother is, and observes that swamp thing from hell, the Tarnhag in all her terrible strength. then heaved his war sword and swung his arm. The decorated blade came down ringing and singing on her head. But he soon found his battle torch extinguished. The shining blade refused to bite. It spared her and failed the man in his need. This unexpected, this sword had never failed before. This is not good. It had gone through many hand-to-hand fights. It had hewed the armor and helmets of the doomed, but here at last the fabulous powers of that heirloom failed. This is an old sword. The old swords are the best swords. The ancient things, the ancient armaments of the heroic age are better, just like the men were older, their weapons are better. There's something about them, and yet this charmed old weapon fails against this foe. Hugelaic's kinsman kept thinking about his name and fame. He never lost heart. Then in a fury he flung his sword away. The keen inlaid worm-looped patterned steel was hurled to the ground. He would have to rely on the might of his arm. So must a man do who intends to gain enduring glory in a combat. Life doesn't cost him a thought. Then the Prince of Warriats, warming to his fight with Grendel's mother, gripped her shoulder. Oh, we know what's going to happen now. The shoulder grip. Here we go. And laid about him in a battle frenzy. He pitched his killer opponent to the floor. It's his mother. I've taken off shoulders here before. Here comes the second shoulder. He's doing the WWE. He's got the shoulder grip. We know it's all over. And he pitched his killer opponent to the floor, and she rose quickly and retaliated, grappled him tightly in her grim embrace. The sure-footed fighter felt daunted. The strongest of warriors stumbled and fell. So she pounced upon him and pulled out a broad, whetted knife. Now she would avenge her only child. Whose side are we on? There's a little bit of ambivalence here. We're on his side, but she's avenging the loss of her only child. Are we not on side with the evil one a little bit here? Are we not pulled into not distinguishing good and evil? But the mesh of chainmail on Beowulf's shoulder shielded his life. Turn the edge and tip of the blade, the son of Ecgtheow would have surely perished, and the Yats lost their warrior under the wide earth, had the strong links and locks of his war gear not helped to save him. Holy God decided the victory. Once again, the divine intrusion into the poem. It was easy for the Lord, the ruler of heaven, to redress the balance once Beowulf got back up to his feet. How? Then he saw a blade that boded well, a sword in her armory, an ancient heirloom from the days of the giants. Genesis 6, maybe? An ideal weapon, one that any warrior would envy, but so huge and heavy of itself, only Beowulf could wield it in a battle. So the shielding's hero, hard-pressed and enraged, took a firm hold of the hilt and swung the blade in an arc, a resolute blow that bit deep into her neck bone and severed it entirely, cuts off her head. Toppling the doomed house of her flesh, she fell to the floor. The sword dripped blood. The swordsman was elated. Takes off the head. Up comes the head. Out comes the arm. 2 trophies. Hey. Off we go. I think I have a few minutes. Okay, so let me move on with the reckoning of this second, and I'll have to deal with the dragon next time very briefly before we move on. But he saw in his fury that the monster in his resting place, a lifeless corpse, a casualty, the body there, he cut the corpse's head off, and there is forebodings on the shore in spite of this. And when he brings the sword up out of it, it vanishes. The blade disappears. Just like in Tolkien's, like the charmed blades that disappear in the light, same thing here. This is an evil weapon. Evil has been used against evil. Good, in some sense, is the only real thing. Evil is the absence of good. But in some ways, evil consumes itself. Violence begets violence. Evil consumes itself. Here, evil has defeated evil. Evil brings its own downfall about. That's what I take from the fact that the sword melts outside. This is an evil weapon that worked underground, but when it's brought into the light, it does not function at all. It's in some ways, evil is the... So I'll give one final World War II analogy. One of the things that historians discuss when they talk about the Second World War is how stupid Hitler was in the fight. What he did to destroy his own side. Like, why did he fight the way he did? And one of the astute comments I once read was that this is characteristic of evil, that in the end, evil hates itself. It only exists opposed to the good. At the end of the day, Hitler didn't love his own troops any more than he loved anything else. He hated his opponent, but he also hated his own people. And if they were not going to win, he was happy to have them destroyed. That's the way it's portrayed in The Lord of the Rings, by the way. So the forces of evil are terrified of the evil behind them, but they don't actually love anything good. They just oppose their opponent. They hate them, but they don't love anything anymore. And so evil ends up preying on itself. It turns on itself. You find this in revolutionary fights as well, that eventually the evil turns on itself. Once its opponent has resisted it strongly enough, it collapses. And maybe that's what's represented here in this second confrontation with evil. I don't know. But I'll get to that next time, and I'll deal with the third confrontation with the dragon. I'm not going to skip that. And then we'll move on to Sir Gawain and the Green Knight, okay, which is a great story in itself. So please read on with that.